Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about how to set up your rakers if you don't have a progressive depth gauge. There's a lot of countries out there that you can't get them from still. They just don't sell them or stock them. Don't know why. But you can get around it. And the way you get around it, if you've got a straight edge and you place it on top of your teeth like this, you can put the feeler gauge underneath. Now, I do have a formula. Now, the formula is, if we take a standard 3/8 chain, the gap, if you put a straight edge over the top of a standard 3/8 chain, you'll have a gap of 0.65 of a millimetre. Now, as you reduce 1 millimetre off that tooth, so a standard 3/8 chain, the tooth is approximately 10 millimetres in length, 9.95, something like that there. So let's just say it's 10. If you measure that tooth and you take a millimetre off it, you need to reduce your raker height by 0.1 of a mil. So for every millimetre that you reduce the tooth, you take 0.1 of a mil. So if you were to measure your tooth and it was 8 millimetres in length, you would have to take off 0.2 mil extra than what it already is at 0.65. So then it would be 0.85. And then so on until you get to the end of the life. So if you get to the end of the life of the tooth, which is approximately removing 7 millimetres of tooth, you'll remove 0.7 of a millimetre by the time you get to the end of the line, the witness mark. So therefore, if you're already removing 0.65 of a millimetre and then you add 0.7, that's 1.35 millimetres. And all you've got to do is use a straight edge and put the feeler gauge underneath, file, check. Sure, it's a little bit slower, but you can do it that way. Another way that you can do it, I made up this little bit of stainless steel, and as you can see, I can adjust the depth. That screw is being ground flat. So I use a feeler gauge and I set up the depth by the feeler gauge. And it's just a matter of placing this on and making sure, moving it backwards and forwards, making sure it sits on top of the teeth. And if I move it forwards and it touches the tooth, that means I've got to grind a little bit more off there or file a little bit more, put it back on and move it a little bit of backwards and forwards. But nonetheless, it works. So if you can play around, if you're a little bit of a handyman and you can make something like this, it's just a 6 millimetre screw, a nut, and a 6 millimetre thread in a piece of metal, and you can just adjust it and set it using a feeler gauge. Simple as that. It's just over 100 millimetres in length, so it'll sit across about 4 teeth, so it'll be nice and level. And as I said, you can use a feeler gauge if you want, or you can use a feeler gauge to set that. So that's one way of doing it. So just to recap, for those people out there that cannot get their hands on a progressive depth gauge, would like to try and make their rakers more efficient, for every millimetre that you grind off your tooth, go down 0.1 of a millimetre extra than what you've already got. So as I said, out of the box, your depth gauge will be set at 0.65 of a millimetre. If you remove 1 mil of tooth, you'll add an additional 0.1 of a millimetre. That would mean you'd increase from 0.65 to 0.75 for the first millimetre that you remove off a brand new chain. I hope that helps. It's a little simple way of doing it if you can't get your hands on a progressive depth gauge, but you can go across to West Coast Saws in America on their website. So if you shoot across over there, scroll down, have a look for progressive depth gauge, you'll be able to get yourself one. If you can't, or you don't want to do that, Husqvarna actually sell one that's not too bad in the 3/8. They don't sell them for every single size chain, but they certainly sell them for 3/8, standard 3/8. So go have a look at Husqvarna. I've actually got one here I can show you. There's there's two different types. They've got one combination that's built into a roller guide. So this is a Husqvarna one, hard and soft setting. So that's another alternative. You've got West Coast Saws, Husqvarna, and you're pretty much limited if you can't get a steel one. The steel one is my favourite because it's been hardened to 62 Rockwell. That means that if you run the file over it, it will not, the file won't affect it because the file is softer than the actual depth gauge itself, and all as that will do will scratch it. So the one that I'm talking about, for those that may be not familiar, this is a progressive depth gauge from Stihl, hard and soft setting. And as you can see, it just has a million scratches over it, and that's all you're ever going to do to it. Highly recommended to get 100% chainsaw efficiency, because the attack angle of tooth needs to be around minimum of 5. Ideal is about 6.3, and you will never achieve that using those little flat gauges, which are a constant depth gauge. Do yourself a favour, buy yourself a progressive depth gauge. Can't get your hands on one, use the feeler gauge method. If that fails and you don't like the idea of doing that, do yourself a favour, get someone to make one of these for you, or make it yourself. It's pretty simple. Thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Bye for now.